Hello, today we are going to talk about solving a one-step equation. This is actually mostly review from last year in 6th grade. The only difference is now we're throwing in some negatives. Make sure your name and date are at the top of this page. Make sure you have the page and something to write with. Last year you learned about this, and we say, how do we solve a one-step equation? In order to solve an equation, we must isolate the variable. When we say isolate, what we mean is get the variable by itself. I'm sure that that sounds familiar to you. And we also need to keep the equation balanced. By balanced, we mean equal on each side. When you were little, you probably hopped on a seesaw or a teeter-totter, I'm hoping you did anyway, at some point. And if the person on the other side was much bigger or much smaller than you, the seesaw or the teeter-totter did not remain balanced. It wasn't equal. It was really hard to go up and down. So that's what we have to do with these one-step equations. We need to make sure both sides of the equation are equal or balanced. So in order to do this, we have to use inverse operations. If we are adding on one side, we now have to subtract to undo. I can also write it. You know how my writing is here. I'm going to just say subtract. The inverse operation of subtraction is addition or add. When we multiply, the opposite is to divide. I'll just write divide so you get that idea. And when we're multiplying, we do the opposite, which is multiply. When we're dividing, we multiply, right? That's the opposite. I hope I said that correctly. All right. Now, this is only to undo the problems. So inverse operations can be thought of as the opposite. I want you to think back to our additive inverse. When we talked about additive inverse in our negatives and positives in that unit, we talked about additive inverse. What do you have to add to something to get it to zero? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get things to zero or undo them. So we're looking to the opposite. Okay, inverse operations are the opposite or undoing. And we just said that, the opposite or undoing operations. Okay, so now let me go back to this. If we see addition, we have to do the opposite so that we can undo it and get x or any other variable by itself. That's what we're looking to do. I'm going to scroll down. Oh, too much scrolling. Okay, sorry about that. And now we're going to try some problems. But I want you to, do you see these two little captions here? It says what operation is taking place. Every single time you see a problem, an algebraic problem, I want you to ask yourself that. What operation is taking place? And then say, what's the inverse operation? Or you'll hear Mrs. Pearson and I say, what's the opposite? What do we have to do to undo this? So that's what we're going to practice right now. You probably know how to do most of these already. Just remember, we also have to remember our integer rules. So I'm going to ask myself, what's the opposite here? Well, what operation is 4x? That means multiply. So I'm going to show division on both sides. When we show division now, we use the fraction bar. That's the best way to show division with algebra. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And that means x is equal to, oh gosh, this is negative 16. Do you see the negative? A negative divided by a positive is a negative. Now I'll do the numbers. What's 16 divided by 4? 4. Now we always do a check. And the way we check is we rewrite the problem. 4x equals negative 16. Always, always rewrite the problem. And the reason we check isn't because we want you to just do one more thing. You check to make sure you solved this correctly. So now in order to check this, I substitute in for x the value I got, which is -4. What is negative 4 times positive 4? It is negative 16, so I know my check works. Always do a check. And number 2, again, ask yourself what operation is going on. This is addition. What's the inverse operation? The inverse is subtracting. So I'm going to subtract this 9 because 9 is on the same side of the equation as the x. So I'm going to subtract off this 9. And now I have x equals, and 13 minus 9 is 4. I'm going to check. I rewrite my original equation. Remember, these are equations now because they have equal signs in them. Up until now, we've been working with expressions. Now we're working with equations. I will substitute my 4 in for x. 4 plus 9 equals 13. Is that true? Sure. And actually, I should show it this way. 4 plus 9, I'm going to show that that equals 13. And I know that 13 equals 13. Yes. Okay, number 3, you know the question. Yes, what operation is going on? Well, x is subtracting 8. So I will now do the opposite. I'm going to add 8 to both sides. Whatever x is subtracting or adding is what you are going to get rid of. Okay, it looks like we have some basic addition and subtraction here. So x equals, this is a plus sign, remember. 4 plus 8 is 12, and I will do my check. X minus 8 equals 4. Now, x is replaced with 12. 12 minus 8 equals 4. I know 12 minus 8 is 4, and I know that 4 equals 4. Okay, the next one looks a little bit trickier. What operation do you think this is? It's division. So the way to undo division, or what's the inverse? The inverse is multiplication. Now, when we have division like this, we show multiplication. Oh, that's supposed to be a parenthesis, with parentheses around the numbers. The parentheses keep things less confusing. What am I multiplying here? I'm multiplying a 5 because that's the number being divided. And I'm going to show that in parentheses. Now, when I multiply 5, and really this is 5 over 1, right? Because we're using fractions. When I multiply 5 times x, I get 5x. I'm going to show this out. We usually don't show this much work, but I want to show it to you. And this is being divided by 5. Well, what's 5 divided by 5? It's a fancy form of 1. So that means I just have 1x. Okay. On the other side, I have negative 6 times 5. Well, let's take care of the integers first. This is a negative. This is a positive. A negative times a positive is a negative. 6 times 5 is 30. And I do my check. Okay, rewriting this, I'm probably going to run out of space here. X over 5 equals negative 6. I'm going to substitute my negative 30 in. Negative 30 divided by 5 equals negative 6. And negative 30 divided by 5 is negative 6. And negative 6 equals negative 6. That is true. It checked. Okay, we're getting there. Now, sometimes you might see a problem where the x is on the other side. So you might see this. Negative 11 equals x minus 6. These are the same exact equations. Exact. But sometimes students, when they see the x on the other side, they get a little bit nervous. So if you do, feel free to write it in the form that you like. Most people, for whatever reason, enjoy having the x on the left side, so if you have to rewrite the equation, go for it. X is subtracting 6, so I'm going to add 6. And I have an integer issue here. So negative 6 plus 6 cancels out. Now I have x equals. Now the signs here are different. If the signs are different, we find the, say it, difference. So this should be -5. Because 11 minus 6 is 5. There are more negatives than positives. X equals -5. Okay, so I'm going to do my check. X minus 6 equals -11. Substitute -5 in for X. Oh my gosh, how does this time go so quickly? Not for you, I'm sure, but it does go quickly for me. Because I've got so many things I want to talk to you about. And I'm doing this quickly. I'm hoping you're following along. If not, we're going to practice some more. This is multiplication. The opposite is division. We show the undoing of multiplication by drawing a line underneath. I'm dividing by -2. -2 divided by -2 is a fancy way of saying 1. X equals, let's take care of the signs first. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, so I don't write anything. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And I do my check. -2x equals -4. I hope you wrote all of these things with me, by the way. And I substitute in -2 times 2 equals -4. And what's -2 times 2? Well, the signs are different, so I'm going to get a negative. 2 times 2 is 4. -4 does indeed equal -4. Yippee! Okay, you are going to do a practice quiz, so make sure you use your notes if you need to.